Join the Widewail team May 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern for part 2 of our 3-part virtual event series, Voice of the Resident. For part 2, we will look specifically at residency. Using AI topic analysis, we've analyzed the free text of 400,000 Google reviews from residents of hundreds of top multifamily groups, including the NMHC Top 50, to identify how often 50 key topics are mentioned by residents. By filtering for and analyzing the topics by life cycle stage, we can isolate which topics are more influential during residency, versus tour, or renewal. Go to widewail.com/data to sign up or find it in the revised community. That's widewail.com/data.
Welcome to Decoding Multifamily, a video podcast that explores different aspects of multifamily operations and takes a deep dive into the important topics that affect the apartment industry. Watch as co-hosts Suzanne Hobson and Paul Marks engage with multifamily thought leaders, rising multifamily superstars, and apartment industry icons. Decoding is defined as the process of extracting meaningful and useful information. So watch closely as we begin Decoding Multifamily.
Welcome to another episode of Decoding Multifamily. We are powered by the Multifamily Media Network. I'm your host, Paul Marks, along with my fantastic co-host, Suzanne Hobson. And we have a couple of guests with us today that Suzanne's going to introduce in just a moment that are going to be discussing some really important things about the multifamily industry that is not only interesting, but it's something that's kind of cutting edge. But I do want to just remind our listeners that we are part of the Multifamily Media Network. You can go there to listen to other great podcasts from our roster of fantastic podcast hosts who are all multifamily industry thought leaders and icons within the industry. You can also subscribe at multifamilymedianetwork.com to the weekly newsletter that will keep you informed as to what podcasts have dropped and some of the blogs from our host of podcasters that are very interesting reading all about the multifamily industry. So go to multifamilymedianetwork.com. So Suzanne, why don't you introduce our two great guests?
Thank you, Paul, and welcome, Jake and Katie. You are actually from one of our founding sponsors, Widewail, and just very excited to take a deep dive into you and really just see what you're seeing in the space around the resident experience. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do at Widewail? Jake?
Yeah, hey, thanks for having us. My name is Jake Hughes. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Widewail. We're very proud to be a founding sponsor of the Multifamily Media Network. So we've got some great research to talk through today. Widewail helps multifamily groups with reviews, and we've been doing a large-scale study on reviews within the industry that I can think can tell a lot of interesting things about what's going on with residents through their own voice. So excited to dive into that and talk through those details.
Thanks, Jake. Katie?
Yeah, thanks for having us. My name's Katie Ritter. I'm our multifamily team lead here at Widewail. So involved in our sales, our current customers, product, anything that relates to our multifamily vertical. And I'm really excited to chat through some of this data. We've been tracking this data for our customers and clients for a while now. And the most fascinating parts of my conversations have been around how this isn't, and we talked a little bit about this, Suzanne, like not just a review score. Yes, we want to help your reputation. Yes, we want to get those reviews up, but we also have this trove of data to use operationally. So it's been really fun to be able to be that missing piece sometimes between marketing and operations and provide some of that data and talk about and learn how folks are using it differently depending on the org. So really excited to dive in further.
We are too. Thanks, Katie. And I know this is the second in a series of 3, right? So you had a chance to chat with Ronald in the first session, which was really cool. I listened in. I don't know if anyone else did, but it was really good. And so as a segue to that, we're really excited to go even a little bit further in and deep dive into the second part of a 3-part series. Great. Well, I'll just get started then. Jake, I'm going to probably throw this one out to you because it is around the data. So how does Widewail really gather data points from residents? How does this work?
Yeah. So we started this journey 5 years ago or so. In the early days of Widewail. Widewail is celebrating its 6th anniversary this summer. So we're still a fairly new and growing company. I like to say that we're in the scaling phase. We're out of startup into growth. And 5 years ago, we partnered with a PhD candidate at Princeton, I believe, and provided her with a database of 10,000 reviews for her to go through and start to pull out insights to find trends and information that could be connected together from all that free text content. Fast forward 5 years with the introduction of AI topic sentiment analysis, which has obviously been taking the world by storm. And I think in this context, it has a lot of interesting applications. And now we have the ability to go through free text and what our residents are telling, not just at a community level or a group level, but at the scale of an entire industry. So we started on this project at the middle of last year, and we built a database covering the entire automotive industry of 4 million reviews. And we're taking that same concept and strategy and approach, the way that we build that database within automotive, and we've applied it to multifamily. So we're just starting to get into the data and see what we can find and learn and share that with the industry. And we are hoping that this can be an extremely valuable resource for the entire industry. So we're able to collect 400,000 Google reviews from the last 12 months. So this is the voice of the resident, words firsthand, that have been communicated about thousands of different communities publicly on behalf of those by those residents. And what we can learn from them is what really matters to the resident in that context. So we've broken it out, 400,000 reviews. We've broken it out into 49 different topics, and there's a number of different ways that we can use the composition of the information that we can pull out of reviews to figure out what the resident really cares about and what stands out to them in that context. So I would say that's the foundation of the data that we've put together. Anything, Katie, that I missed in that overview?
No, that sounds great. We're using those 400,000. We're excited to continue to break it down even further into life cycle stages, region, and continuing to work and try to gather more insights into this, what we're saying. So we're excited to dig deeper into that. But yeah, you summed it up well.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think to your point, Jake and Katie, the access to data now, especially with AI, is a little overwhelming, to say the least.
Yeah.
And our access to it is just so much easier. But to try to take that data and really make some wise business decisions out of it is daunting, right? Because there's just so many resources and so much out there that this really provides perhaps a methodology of how to do that in a really educated way. And you spoke about, those 49 points, and excuse me if I'm not using the right jargon, but what are some of those that you found are at the top of the list for our residents in terms of their experience on a level of importance, like highest importance? What are you hearing?
So we break it up. We're describing them as topics. So, for example, cleanliness, amenities, location. These are different, they're almost keywords that come up frequently in reviews. And we've we've used the AI and the summarization to pare it down to 49. Honestly, I don't know why it's 49. It's sort of a random number, but that's just what it ended up being, I suppose, in the end. And we've broken it out into what's commonly comes up within the context of a positive review, so 4 and 5 stars, and versus a negative review, which is 3 stars and less. Again, all the reviews are Google reviews, so they're graded on a 1 to 5 scale. On the positive side, on-site teams come up as the most influential, I don't really know how to describe this component, the like piece of the community that is driving positivity amongst residents in the context of a review, which I think is consistent with what we've seen in other industries and very interesting in the world of, especially for operators trying to figure out AI and how to tackle that challenge this year, because it's definitely top of mind. And this, I don't want to say it makes it entirely a counterpoint, but it reinforces that your on-site teams are driving a positive resident experience, and that's consistently what residents are talking about. 60% of positive reviews mention on-site teams, and the second most often mentioned topic in positive reviews is location. So that's 3.8 times as often that on-site teams are coming up, which is a huge spread. That's way more than we see in automotive, and a lot more focus on that individual connection. So what this tells me is if you're interested in implementing any AI technology, it sort of needs to be to remove something off the plate of your teams such that they can really focus on providing that great resident experience one-to-one that will ultimately show up in your reviews and drive your reputation.
You know what's
that was like brilliant. Yeah, totally. Sorry, Paul, didn't mean to cut you off. That was a big one. Yeah.
What's interesting about that study and the results, to me, it, you see at the bottom of the results, things like affordability, less than 2%, pets at 2%, which are, those are big things we talk about a lot in multifamily is affordability, but yet on these reviews, it wasn't a major thing. So what that tells me, and Suzanne, I think you've heard me say this before, my father used to always say, it doesn't matter what you think people think, it only matters what they really think. And what you guys are doing is figuring out what people really think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point, Paul. And I've said this to Jake before, but this idea of perception is reality for folks. And it's not just exactly what you're saying. You're not necessarily just for the reviewer, but for folks who are reading these reviews. And you may think that pets and affordability and all of those things, and you survey them and you understand what are people saying, but out there in public, this is how people are talking about you. And so being able to measure that is that point, reputation 2.0 is understanding that data. And I think being able to then operationalize it, because I agree. I had a great conversation with a third party fee manager, and he was saying, like, I'm just trying to get owners to understand that the pool table in the basement isn't necessarily what's going to drive this home. It's like, and so I was like, yeah, it's your people, and it behooves us to think about, exactly like Jake said, taking something off their plate versus taking them out of the process completely. It's not just about improving margins; it's about improving the whole operation and improving the resident experience. And to do that, you do need people in place. And that's what the data is saying.
I love that. And there's so many ways we can go on this conversation, just from that story, right? I think we all have a story of that.
Yeah.
The pool table, even the pool, like some of the amenities are such a focus, while building. And yes, they're attractive, but they're not necessarily the highest rank, in importance. I also noticed on the results that maintenance is really high. Like it's very much called out as
Mm-hmm.
as
Yeah.
very up high on the. Tell me a little bit about what you're finding there. Is that what's behind that?
Maintenance is a good one to bring up. I think there's a number of different ways to approach it. It is the most often mentioned topic in negative reviews. So there's two ways. If your goal is to shape your reputation, which is to sort of craft how you're viewed within the market, and use and leverage your residents as your spokespeople for the community to put your name out there and back you up and show off what you have to offer, maintenance needs to be a piece of that puzzle for a few reasons. One, it's driving the most negativity, and I think in part because it comes up often organically. So we see this contradiction between I call it the silent happy majority of residents, people that, I mean, think about the last time you went to the dry cleaner and they finished your cleaning on time. It cost what you expected it to cost. They didn't mess it up. There was no stains on it. You went, you got your clothes, you're left. There was no prompt there to leave feedback. They did their job. You feel happy. You're satisfied with the experience. But the taking the next step to get that individual to promote the business publicly is on the business to encourage that and to make that happen. And I think with maintenance, one of the major challenges of multifamily is that compared to auto, at least, there's a somewhat lack of opportunity. The amount of review volume that you're able to execute on is a function of how many material interactions that you have with your residents that could qualify as a reviewable event. And we see some hesitation amongst operators to use the maintenance trigger and use the maintenance life cycle stage in those moments to generate reviews, because we see a lot of organic negativity. But that's exactly the sort of situation that you really need to go headlong into to solve those problems, because there's two ways to increase and improve your reputation. You can maximize positivity, but also minimize the negativity that's going in. And focusing on the topics that show up a lot of negative reviews to minimize the frequency of those is also going to push you in the right direction.
Yeah, it really shows you the areas operationally, as Katie was talking about, that you could go to work on, right? Like these are the things I need to look at, my processes, perhaps people, training, capacity issues, resources. I think the data is really compelling there. And I know you keep talking about the auto industry. I just want to go into this a little bit further and talk about, what you're seeing in terms of likeness and also, differences between automotive and multifamily. Because I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, broad strokes. Auto is a very high volume industry, and it has some inherent benefits because of that. The average community, to give you context, the average community generates 1.6 Google reviews a month. So that's the national average across the cohort of communities that we looked at. The average car dealership generates 10.4 reviews a month. So
Wow.
whatever that is, 8-9 times the amount of volume. And what we see, and what my data science team tells me, that it is positively correlated between review volume and rating. So the more reviews that you're able to generate ultimately does lead to higher scores. And we believe it's because of this sort of activating the silent happy majority of people that, when asked, are willing to give you positive feedback, but are not going to go out of their way to do it independently. So I think a lot of activity in auto is what's driving them forward, and a little bit more maturity in terms of reputation and execution on the strategy side. Looking at reputation as this proactive way to build your public image versus just monitoring customer feedback. So the technology that we put out into the market, and then the research to go along with it, is this combination of here's how you go out and get feedback, and then we can give you the information that says, here's what you should do with that feedback after you get it.
Yeah, it's really two-pronged. It's like using the power of the reputation management to drive more reviews and higher scores, and then also being able to take that data and interpret it operationally and how you can improve the operations that back up, obviously those scores. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there. So in terms of the industries and the difference, and you mentioned something that I think is so important, and I don't know that we're all that great at it. I think some operators are, but some are still lagging behind, and that's really asking for the review. We're just not really great at that. I don't know if we're shy or what the deal is. But can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing there, and I don't know, your insights on that?
I'm smiling because it comes up on every conversation I have. Is this our philosophy is open the floodgates, ask, tour, move in, renewal, work order, complete, as many touch points as possible, automate it. And I would say 98% of the time, it's that fear of, well, what if we get more negative feedback? Or what if this, someone who has a bad experience, or the wait time was too long for their work order, or, or this or this and this. And our response typically is, well, they're going on there anyway. So we're gonna go after, and we do ask everyone, because that's, FTC and Google and all of these policies. We don't want to try to suppress feedback at all. So asking everyone, and like Jake said, that the more reviews, the better ratings. But yeah, I do think that there is that fear of opening that floodgates, and it's more of a reactive, let's just put on our PR hats and respond to reviews to manage it. But people are now, a lot of our conversations are more about being proactive. And to give you an anecdotal example, we had a group who didn't want to turn renewal triggers on because they were worried about rent increases, which is a really popular conversation we have too. Like, okay, if we turn on and ask about renewal, they're just going to talk about rent increases. Paul, you mentioned, affordability is actually pretty low on on that list. So we were tagging up their just reviews generally that came in organically that mentioned renewal. And for 3 months, the average rating was a 2.6. So they were like, oh no, like, we don't want to ask. We convinced them to turn on the renewal. And then in January, it was a 4.4. And the focus was less about the rent increase, and more just about how was your experience, and how was your experience with the community, the property manager, talk to us about this, and just in general, and giving them the platform and free text to just talk about their overall experience. And that personal ask puts someone behind that ask versus just general feedback into the ethos that negative people tend to want to do. So that's just a quick example of some of that, what can be possible with proactivity. Join the Widewail team May 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern for part 2 of our 3-part virtual event series, Voice of the Resident. For part 2, we will look specifically at residency. Using AI topic analysis, we've analyzed the free text of 400,000 Google reviews from residents of hundreds of top multifamily groups, including the NMHC Top 50, to identify how often 50 key topics are mentioned by residents. By filtering for and analyzing the topics by life cycle stage, we can isolate which topics are more influential during residency, versus tour, or renewal. Go to widewail.com/data to sign up, or find it in the revised community. That's widewail.com/data.
The word
that really
proactive
seems
just really
to me like to be the secret. I'm sorry, Suzanne. I was just saying that seems to be like that's the secret sauce of operating properties in this environment we have today. I know that, obviously, um, I will stay for the record that I'm the most prehistoric person on this panel. And I can remember times when there was no such thing as a internet, so there were no online reviews. And if you wanted to find an apartment, you had to go to a grocery store and get a magazine, and it directs you to different apartments in your area. So the industry's come a long way. And I had a conversation years ago, several years ago, and I'm going to say maybe 6 years ago, with one of my acquaintances who's a VP with a major, um, with a regional VP with a major management company and owner. And he said at that time, when everybody was frightened of online reviews, they were encouraging people to do it. They were putting signs out all throughout their common areas. They were uh, at making personal asks to do reviews. And I asked him the question, what about the fact that you may get negative reviews? He says, we want those because we want to know what we need to fix. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a different way of thinking about it, I think, than a lot of people have.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we can learn from how do I put this? There's sort of this run into the fire and get it going and try to not direct people so much and just collect as much as you can. And our experience is that it works out in the end. It tends to trend up the more people you get involved in the conversation, which is what we would recommend.
Suzanne, let me just give you a quick time check. We've got about 14 minutes left.
All right, great. So on that note about automating this and the advantages of automating it, and really putting that into your whole customer journey at different points, have you found that the number of reviews impacts response, or do we not know yet? Like does it bother a resident to be asked 10 times, in a specific period of time, or, do they not mind? And what would impact that? Is it length? Is it can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think you're spot on to be thoughtful about looking at, okay, from start to finish, tour to move out, how should we interact with our residents? Our philosophy is automating at those key moments I mentioned: tour, move in, renewal, and work order complete, where there is something material that transpired between the team and a resident or prospect. And we don't follow up. We don't send more than one. Keep it just to that one interaction, and make sure that it's highly personalized. And so I think once you do get that full picture, and don't need to send multiple, just kind of one at a time. And then also being thoughtful about, folks are going to submit multiple work orders. We don't need to ask them every time. Let's limit this to a couple a year. So I think there are definitely ways to prevent the over communication. It is certainly a fear sometimes, and I think most people are relieved when we say, hey, this is a one-off thing associated with that specific interaction, and they're not going to keep getting these drip campaign messages to leave a review. It's going to be highly personal right after that interaction, and that's it. And if they do, they do. If they don't, they don't. But keep it light and keep it, to those specific touch points.
Yeah, that's the first time I've heard that recommendation. I've always heard that, this is attached to your work order system, right? And so immediately after a work order is completed, then the survey goes out. And so that's a survey, but also, soliciting reviews, same thing. So I think that's a really great piece of advice, and it helps to contextualize just what you're talking about. I know we all feel a little bit inundated sometimes with reviews,
Mhm.
and so the shorter the better too. Are you finding that, like, just the quick questions, or is there any truth to the length?
Yeah, we we default to using SMS first. So going right into where folks are spending their time. And I think, yeah, if you open your phone and you see a wall of text, it's probably not as appealing. So certainly, a couple sentences, really simple. Not a lot of clicks to get to Google or the sites that you're focused on. So yes, we certainly recommend keeping the ask pretty short and uh, getting to the point right away.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, that's great. So talk a little bit about some of what you're seeing out there in terms of some real life examples. I know we're still in the gathering the data mode. You talked about a couple of stories where you're seeing some of this in action, how they've changed some things operationally. Is there anything else you can share about how just doing this in this way could really change things up, or is changing things up?
Yeah. One story that comes to mind with this data is really every management company, every owner operator functions differently, and they all have different strengths. And we went to in person to a third party fee manager a couple months ago and shared their this data with them, their own data, and then compared that data to where some industry benchmarks were. And first they were shocked that we were able to grab this data. They had no way to they had no way to interpret they were focused on the scores, and they were pleasantly surprised that we had all of this. And we went through and we talked about how their staff was clearly, and similar to industry, was the leading topic. And they said this is exactly in line with how we're tackling the AI, phase right now, is we really just want to keep our focus on our people. And their mentions and their ratings of staff were above the industry. Where they were below, and their mentions of the maintenance team and the folks on site, where they were below was around amenities. And they said, well, our our best attributes are our people and wait times, maintenance, things like that. And so that's what we choose to highlight, and it makes sense that we're not necessarily on par with maybe some of the mentions of positive reviews to our amenities, because it's not necessarily the makeup of our communities. And so choosing to highlight what you're really good at and what is really present in those positive reviews unique to your company is, I think, something that you can gain out of these types of insights. Is, yeah, we're not going to compete with like the high, luxury buildings with all the amenities, but we have this, and this is what we can highlight in our advertising, in our messaging, how we can attract new residents. Because I don't know, maybe, yes, we have a pool, but maybe this community's wait time for maintenance is rated a 4.4. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what's going to be most attractive to me. So it was a really fun conversation, and how the data matched up with their expectations of what they'd like to deliver and the type of service they'd like to deliver. And I think my when we first embarked on this, I was like, well, is everything going to be the same? And that's actually not the case. And it's been really fun to see how different companies and can take their own data and use it. Yeah, if that makes sense.
It totally does. You were talking about repositioning, or, positioning or highlighting a certain part of what you do really well, and as part of a whole marketing approach to, what a company is doing for a particular
Mhm.
site, or even maybe their company brand, could be really compelling, and give you some data to really utilize. Sometimes it's just think we talked about this earlier, what people think and what their perception is. And this really is the backup for all of that. I also think you're really good at interpreting it, which is also another part to, I think, some of the confusion out there for operators is, okay, I've got this data, but now what exactly do I do with it? And I think you've really given some great suggestions on, how to utilize that with your operations and with your marketing, quite honestly. So I love that. I love that.
It's
I can also,
definitely. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, well, I get a little excited and I jump in. So
Same.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, okay, I'm thinking like in the future, right? I'm thinking about down the line and how this could be really cool, especially when we're talking now so much in our space about specializing roles and, the term centralization and all of that. There's some proof here, I'm sure, with, companies that are doing really well in specializing those roles and being able to get their people more engaged with the residents because they're not overwhelmed, because that's what we hear is one of the driving forces, obviously, of specialization, and giving people, the 1 to 3 things that they're going to be great at in terms of interacting with the customer. And so I'm really excited about how that could impact that as a backup, if you will, to what some people are experimenting with specializing certain roles. Have you talked much about that in the space with operators or not yet?
Yeah, I think our conversations about ultimately the goal is to have the on-site teams be focused on what they do best and create that great resident experience. And so I do think specialization and taking some of this, like part of what we do is review response. And so taking some of these tasks off of their plate so they can focus on how to execute and be there for their residents. And I do think that it falls in line with what we talk about and staff being and on-site teams being so high is, yes, there is technology out there to cut costs, make things more efficient, but we still have to keep people in place and make sure that they're executing at the highest level. So yes, 100%. I think it lends itself to this idea of people plus technology to make everything run smoothly, for sure.
The beauty of this information is it's very specific. So industry benchmark, 60.6% of your positive reviews should mention on-site teams. If only 40% are mentioning on-site teams in a positive context, then you are underperforming the industry by a very specific number. And you can track that number over time and set a goal of improving that experience in a specific way and track how it's kind of coming out on the back end in public feedback and track it as you approach and eventually exceed the industry benchmark. You can do this in any number of different categories and track your performance over time.
We have
Are you
time,
constantly
Suzanne,
benchmarking the data? So at any given time, if there's a change, that's how do you benchmark? Like how does that work?
So the data set is 400,000 reviews over the last 12 months. It's an average. So all the topic mentions are an average of the group over that time frame. What I've learned is that this benchmark data, it doesn't move dramatically. It's a big enough data set that it shouldn't be very reactive to small changes. So it will every quarter, 6 months to a year, it'll evolve slightly. But I think the information is fairly consistent. The data points are going to be fairly consistent, so you can have a clear target to work towards. So that the benchmarking is just the average performance of how often this concept is mentioned in positive reviews over this last year.
Gotcha. I was interested in
Suzanne,
in the parameters
unfortunately,
for that. So tell us a little bit more about the impact that, like some of the results that came in and driving that positive resident experience. You said there's 49. What are some of the other ones that you have seen are just really impactful that we should be keeping an ear out for in those results?
Yeah, let's see. I know I saw a podcast recently. Well, it was Rooms with Ronald talking about community. So community, as my interpretation of it is it's in vogue now, and that is coming. That's the 14th most mentioned topic within positive reviews. So, ideas of good. There's the attributes of the community and the neighborhood amenities, the community. All these things tend to come up in positive reviews. The challenge there is a lot of that is fairly fixed. It's not something that can be tweaked and changed on a consistent basis. But communication is number 3 on the negative side, and that's a good one to cue into. We see this in automotive too, is that sort of everything revolves around communication. Communication impacts a wide variety of situations, and if you get communication right, it tends to have this rippling effect that lifts up all ships. So it's not that it's not always that the specific thing is wrong, but that the communication to tell you that didn't tell you that it was wrong in the first place or in an appropriate amount of time, that tends to be what pains residents the most.
Well, Suzanne, we are out of time. I do want to let Katie and Jake tell everybody how they can be reached if someone wants to reach out to them, find out more about Widewail, and or if they have a question about some of the data. How can you guys be reached? Do you want to start, Katie?
Yeah, sure. So we widewail.com, that's our website, WIDEWAIL. I do always like to spell it out because we get a bunch of different variations here. The data specifically is widewail.com/data. So we're hosting a Voice of the Resident series on Revise, which will dive into different life cycle stages and more of this data over the next couple months. And so information on that can be found at that widewail.com/data. Anything else, Jake? You're our marketing pro. How'd I do?
You did great. Yeah. No, I'm super excited. Widewail.com/data is just the easiest URL to remember in order to get to the right spot. And if you are on the Revised community, we have all the events posted in there. We'll be doing 3 virtual events, not terribly dissimilar from this one, but with a little bit more visuals and detail. We're trying to split up into life cycle stages. So the first one is on May 9th, and we're doing tour and move-in. May 29th for the second with residency, and then June 6th for the third with retention. So getting a little bit more deep into life cycle stage, do a little bit of regional performance and see how different cities compare. And dig even deeper into the topics, splitting those out by life cycle stage. So we'll do a full analysis of all these topics, which we've done so far at the top level, and we'll break it out further into life cycle stage and see
Suzanne,
how it differs.
Can you, as we close, can you just give a 30-second summation to our audience of why this data is so important and why it is important for an operator to engage a company like Widewail to help them with this?
Absolutely. This is the voice of your resident. Your resident's telling you what matters to them. And you can discover all this information through your reviews. I think this is normally done through surveys, but there's all this wonderful information to be found through reviews. And it's that much more valuable because it's information that's been put out in public. Your residents are willing to put their stamp of approval and their name out in the public eye. And this is what they're putting their weight behind. And I think operators can learn a lot of information. This is reputation, but it's also operational improvement, resident experience. It's sort of this like constant feedback mechanism that's marketing your communities, getting your name out there, and then also informing you on what's working and what's not. And the beauty of this data is that we have all the benchmarks, and we're very transparent about it. So you don't have to pay Widewail to get the benchmarks. We can give you all this great information and give you a basis for how you're doing in a number of different detailed ways.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Katie. Thank you, Jake. Always thanks to you, Suzanne, for being on. That's going to wrap up this episode of Decoding Multifamily, but I do want to remind our audience that Decoding Multifamily is part of and powered by the Multifamily Media Network. So go to multifamilymedianetwork.com, sign up and subscribe to the weekly newsletter that'll inform you of all the great podcasts and from our great great roster of hosts of podcasts, all about the multifamily industry. So thank you guys again. We'll be back with another episode soon. Have a great day.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Decoding Multifamily video podcast, and please tune in to future episodes. If you would like to subscribe to our weekly newsletter or discuss being a podcast guest on Decoding Multifamily, please go to multifamilymedianetwork.com. Thank you for watching Decoding Multifamily.